Hello, everyone. I hope you've all had an amazing time at Summit this week. I know I have. GraphQL Summit has been so impactful for me over the last couple of years, and I'm thrilled to have this opportunity to get back to it today with our conversation. As noted, my name is Kyle Krupp. I work at Liberty Mutual as a principal software engineer, and today we're going to talk about friction. And before we get started, just curious, by show of hands, how many people are implementing Federation today? Okay, oh wow. And then how many people are just getting started, like you're about to implement Federation? All right. But everyone, this is the slide deck for you, so I'm glad you're here. Because even if you're new to GraphQL or you're very experienced, you do know the selling point is that it's transcended the client experience. And more recently, Federation has taken it to the next level. But with Federation, that indicates by definition that we're shipping individual software components, the subgraphs. And how the sausage is made doesn't matter to the clients, and it shouldn't. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't care about it. Because if we neglect the process with which Federation is delivered, or if worse, we don't have a process at all, aren't we just kind of lifting and shifting the friction? So I'm going to address this topic today, and here's how I'm going to do it. First, I'll tell you a little bit about me and my employer. We'll talk about the dream state a little bit, like what it looks like with Federation at scale, some anti-patterns and sources of friction, and then we'll wrap up with the inverse, some actual patterns for success. So no matter where you're at in your journey, this is for you. I've been working in software delivery for the past 8 years. I've worked for companies both large and small, most recently a really large enterprise in Liberty Mutual. I've been with Liberty for the past 5 years and working with the GraphQL specification for the same. And most recently, I've been working with Federation for the last 2 years, with the first year being working on one of those early tribal teams that's rolling greenfield subgraphs, to most recently this past year working on a new team that was stood up whose sole purpose is to store the Supergraph initiative at Liberty Mutual. And so we're doing all that on a really small team in a big pond. And that big pond being Liberty Mutual. So just to set the stage, or sort of the landscape, we are number 87 on Fortune 100's list of largest corporations in the US. We have 45,000 employees globally, with 5,000 of those being tech employees. And we have been doing business for a long time, way before GraphQL Federation, way before computers. We're 112 years old, so we've been providing insurance ever since the medium for doing so was on paper. With us being such a big company, I want to give a glimpse of what Federation has done in our technology organization. And this will not be an exhaustive list, but generally speaking, this is what Federation powers for us. The first is sales, how we quote and sell our products. The second is service, how we manage those products once they are sold to a customer. The third is claims, how we deliver on our promises to our customers. And the last one being analytics, which are data-driven methods of offering discounts to our customers through telematics programs. So we at Liberty Mutual have been providing peace of mind to our customers in a variety of ways over the past 112 years. We're passionate about modernizing the way we do business, and I'm sure after this week at GraphQL Summit, many of you are as well. Now, there's a common saying with GraphQL or with GraphQL Federation, or maybe just a saying in general, that the sum is greater than its parts, right? That the collective benefit of this unified API layer is the beauty of it all. And while that's absolutely true, and I'm sure you'll likely find no one here this week saying otherwise, I like to take it a step further and say that with the supergraph, the sum is only as good as its parts. And making those parts good is the challenging part. And you've heard it said in the keynotes for the past few days that the ergonomics of GraphQL development matter. We need to make GraphQL easier. And it's no doubt that all of us at Liberty Mutual, all of us at this conference share a passion for creating those amazing experiences for our customers. And specifically, let's remind ourselves what we mean when we say that, because when we talk about crafting these experiences for our customers, we're empathizing with what it means to build those experiences. And I'm sure you might have seen a diagram like this before. If you have, it's because it's directly from Apollo's marketing materials. But as illustrated so far throughout this talk and throughout this week, we know that GraphQL Federation inherently removes friction from the client layer here on the left, and this is great. This is the dream state. But getting here isn't easy, because at the end of the day, the supergraph that you ship to production is nothing more than its individual Lego pieces. And those Lego pieces can be delivered in any way possible with Federation, whatever runtime you're doing, whatever deployment strategy, and that is so enabling and terrifying. Because if we just leave that be and we don't pay any attention to how we're assembling those Lego pieces, this is where friction really starts to come in. This is a very long slide animation. It's great, though. But at the end of the day, if we don't set any tension with how we're delivering our subgraphs, then aren't we just kind of moving the friction from one area to this middle layer? Because at the end of the day, friction is a zero-sum game. If we drastically improve the client experience by virtue of GraphQL Federation, the heuristics with which we accomplish that matter. So let's discuss those heuristics and what this concern is about shifting friction to the middle of that diagram. Let's talk about where the subgraphs lives and what that looks like. I can tell you what it does not look like. Because in the worst case, when you're just starting out, you don't really have a process for anything yet. But you've bought into the selling point of Federation. You've been coming to this conference. You've sipped the juice. And you're eager to adopt Federation at scale. Well, what happens? Friction rears its ugly head. And if this is what your inbox looks like after being out of office for a week, that's also what our inbox looks like when we had this friction-based practice. But it's arguably any friction is bad, but this is arguably the most malignant friction, because it's simply the easiest to fall into and the hardest to break out of. Because in the absence of having any real process for building subgraphs, you have what has crippled large corporations for the past few years, which is unscheduled asynchronous communication. And this is the kind of friction that's the primary blocker for adopting any new technology, because if the way you accomplish work is via haphazard communication, just kind of rolling the dice and saying, let's just figure this thing out, it's only destined to fail. And maybe you graduate, and the close cousin of asynchronous communication is the wiki page. But the wiki page is just generally more accepted in this family of friction because it really has the best intentions in mind. Someone went out of their way to document for the next guy in line. And the ironic part to me about this is that it's so close to being what it sets out to be. There's this lexicon of information, and that's what's going to be what settles friction once and for all. But as the story often goes with documentation, it has outleading or outdated or misleading information, because typically there's no version control or peer review process for crafting this documentation. So this documentation can truly be localized in a scenario where this worked on my machine, which is a saying I'm sure we all love to hear. So there's outdated or misleading information. There's localized documentation. But most important of all, the problem with this is that it puts so much trust and ownership on the consumer of the wiki page that they're going to be successful in following each of these steps. It puts all the responsibility on the consumer to successfully follow the author's steps. And with either brand of friction, whether you're just haphazardly communicating via emails or meetings, or you have death by documentation, they both share the same associated costs. The first is time, because in the example of having no pattern, the time that's spent with having no pattern is kind of incalculable, isn't it? Like, how much time do we really think about what we're dedicating to email and meetings on a particular subject? Oftentimes, we don't even think about it at all. We just go home and say, man, that was a busy week at work. Or worse, we do think about it, and we identify GraphQL Federation as really being a bear. Like, it takes a village to get this thing over the finish line. And those sentiments right there, why they are completely valid when you're in this environment, they are project killers. Because, as indicated earlier, Liberty Mutual is a very large and a very old company. We've got lots of technical problems to solve for. Modernizing our client and API experience is just one of them. And so with the other brand of friction, with death by documentation, you can really fall into the same trap, because the engineering churn spent coordinating localized documentation efforts leads to money. And as is often told in a cliche, time is closely associated with money. So we really can't afford this engineering churn, because 100% of the time, if modernizing our client API experience is filled with friction, we are going to put that on the back burner, or senior leadership is just going to can the whole thing altogether. So we're kind of like weighing the balance of having our cake and eating it too, having this wonderful client API experience world. And with all this talk about time and money spent, time and money wasted, I mentioned that it doesn't really matter where you're at in your GraphQL journey, because you can do this from the start. Having asynchronous haphazard attempts at communication or localized documentation efforts, it's not a prerequisite to building up the muscle to having no friction. Because with all the aforementioned time spent, whether it's the communication or the well-intentioned documentation, that time commitment can just be lifted and shifted to something greater right from the jump. And when we say things like the sum is only as good as its part, that statement is replete with meaning. It's to suggest that at the end of the day, the supergraph that you ship to production is only as good as the underlying subgraphs that resolve it. And a measure of good here isn't necessarily talking about the operations in your supergraph, it's talking about the heuristics with which that supergraph is engineered. Because the beauty of Federation is much like the root GraphQL spec itself. It's merely a way of delivering API experiences. And as we know, it's not tied down to any particular programming language or runtime. And while that is truly amazing and enabling, if we leave that be and we just don't set any intention with how we're delivering our subgraphs in our enterprise, it becomes Pandora's box. So what do we need? To start, we need a deployment strategy. Because like I said, we're not tied down to any one particular deployment strategy, but it shouldn't be lost on us that there's numerous benefits to having a consistent approach. With the example of Kubernetes, if your Apollo router is sitting on an EKS cluster, and you have the ability or the opportunity to deploy your subgraphs to that same cluster, well, you get two benefits right out of the box. The first one being you can configure your routing URL of your subgraph to just be a local cluster endpoint. In networking, every millisecond counts. There's been plenty of talks on this week of how to make things as fast as possible. This is just the easiest low-hanging fruit that you can pick right off the tree. The second with this example of Kubernetes is ingress rules, because the router is the only client of the subgraphs. So shouldn't we make it so that only these two machines can talk to each other? That is something that should be consistent and self-service. The next one is something you really do have to nail, and that's schema delivery. I know I've been going to every single talk I can squeeze in on schema delivery this week, and it's because you need to provide everyone the same tools when they're delivering their schema. Because with the example of the Rover CLI, which manages the Apollo GraphQL schema, there's really only downsides to just sending people documentation and having them figure out how to put it in their pipelines. This is another low-hanging fruit, which you can just make a pattern for and put it in their pipelines so everyone is marching to the same beat. This is something that should be consistent and self-service. The last is authorization patterns, because security is one of the most important elements of software development, especially when it comes to APIs. And so when we're talking about the router being the only client of the subgraphs, another low-hanging fruit example is just writing a quick middleware pattern for decoding a JOT and reading the scopes. Because again, only these two machines to talk to each other. This is something that should be consistent and self-service. So to make this real, at Liberty Mutual, we have a proprietary software cataloging platform. But that's not what I'm here to sell you today, because while our platform is amazing and has unlocked so much potential for our technology organization, I want to be clear that the proprietary nature of this platform is not what makes these consistent and self-service ideas possible for an organization. In any large enterprise, you might have your own home-brewed software cataloging platform, or if you don't, there's plenty of lightweight open source solutions. I know there's been plenty of talks this week on Backstage. But the bottom line is the marketplace patterns require the same amount of time and money, if not less, than putting together one-pagers or routinely meeting with new teams coming on board. Because if you're already in the mode of thinking of the next team in line, instead of showing them by way of documentation, just give it to them, all the batteries included. So for us, that means you have your GitHub repository with the starter code for spinning up an Apollo subgraph server. You have your authorization logic. You have your linting and unit testing. You have your CI/CD pipelines, which everyone's marching to the same beat with the same rover CLI commands. And you have a deployment pattern where everyone's neighbors, so to speak, on this EKS cluster. And you put that all together, and you have a production-ready subgraph in minutes. I would demo this, but the demo would just be me clicking a button. And so now that we have those non-negotiables, and we're winning with Federation at scale, why don't we just take a slam dunk and really take the engineering enablement to the next level? Because with the non-negotiables being the deployment strategy, the schema delivery, authorization patterns, well, we can now go back to what I was so afraid of with subgraphs being in different programming languages and whatnot, and we can use those things that are set in stone and extend it to other programming languages. So at Liberty, we have a vast technology stack, and we have systems that we would love to be a part of the Supergraph family. So whether you're in Node.js land and you're passionate about the Express library or Nest.js framework, or your workload is running on the JVM and you're a Spring guru, the GraphQL subgraph is the pattern that meets teams where they are. And if you're as jazzed up about this stuff as I am, great, you've come to the right talk. But even with this excitement and idealism, these like pie-in-the-sky ideas, with any kind of software delivery, you're only as good as you're able to measure. So let's conclude with some convincing testimony for my world in the hopes that removing friction from the start will be a practice you can take to your organization today. We know management loves numbers, right? Because if we're going to reshift time and effort allocation from friction-based practices to frictionless practices, what is the efficacy of all this? Well, I'd be happy to testify to the question of, is it worth it, to a resounding yes. Because the numbers on the screen here are year-over-year numbers from where we were with Federation Initiative just 1 year ago. And there's a true correlation between these numbers, because as more subgraphs and operations come online, we see a direct increase in the amount of clients. And this is what we're trying to achieve. We're achieving the reuse and monetization of our client and API experience. And it's all done so without the friction, because it's not lost on me that any organization can get to these numbers with enough brute force or sheer will. But getting to that result can be a bear. And if you start to lose sight of the original purpose you were so passionate about with this technological feat. It starts to make the argument of adopting GraphQL, of adopting Federation, harder to answer for. So my favorite KPI is one that can't be quantified. It's the friction-free environment that is now realized. Because if we have any unscheduled asynchronous communication, it's either a compliment. That last one might be an embellishment or entirely made up. But it's either a compliment or it's about those higher level conversations. It's discussions about big picture ideas with what our schema governance board is doing to shape strategy, or architectural ideas for how we can improve our ecosystem surrounding the supergraph. All of our communications and our meetings are centered around more nuanced, impactful discussions that propel us forward. The table stakes stuff is already taken care of. So to me, this is the truest sign that we are both enabling our clients with GraphQL Federation as well as our API developers. And I put this slide up here because there's so much more that we've been working at Liberty Mutual in the world of Federation, not enough to speak to in 30 minutes. So if you're around and you're interested in what we just talked about or any of these other topics, please come find us at the reception. But I've had a blast at GraphQL Summit this year, getting to meet so many brilliant thinkers and leaders in this space. It's been a pleasure getting to share some words of wisdom with you all today. And if you have any questions or want to connect, I will be around. Thank you.